It's like I have a spasm. And I was kind of talking like this. I thought maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe I'll never sing again.
At 57, Céline Dion finally opens up with raw honesty about René Angélil, the man who shaped her life in every way. He was not only her manager, but also her husband, mentor, and greatest believer.
I spent all my life in the music industry, being a performer and loving every moment of it. This passion will never go away.
When she was just 12, René mortgaged his own house to invest in her career, turning a poor Canadian girl into one of the most powerful voices in music history. Together, they built an empire of love and success. But behind the glamour were battles with illness, grief, and unbearable loss. René stood by her for more than 30 years until cancer stole him away in 2016. Join us as we explore what Céline's life looked like because of René's death and the difficult moments she passed through. Moments after René Angélil's death, in 2016, Céline Dion's world fell apart in ways she never imagined. First, she lost the man she had built her entire life with, her beloved husband Rene, who passed away after a long battle with cancer. Just 2 days later, grief struck again when her brother passed. The pain was too much, and she collapsed under the weight of it all, feeling as though she would never be able to rise again. As if loss wasn't enough, illness crept into her life, bringing with it a rare condition that made her muscles spasm and her once powerful voice tremble. For someone who had soared on stage for decades, this cruel twist felt like her wings had been clipped. The world that once celebrated her began to whisper behind her back, calling her a shadow of her golden years. She even collapsed to the floor in the middle of a seizure, and while she lay helpless, she could feel the sting of voices declaring her career was over. Many believed she was strong because she continued to smile in public, but behind the cameras, there were tears and long nights of loneliness. She had lost her partner, her health, and the very gift that had defined her life. And if that wasn't enough, she had to endure the cruelty of people she once shared respect and admiration with. There were singers she once looked up to, colleagues she once trusted, who mocked her struggles and made her the butt of their jokes to lift themselves higher. They laughed at her suffering, and though their words cut deep, she chose silence, pouring all her emotions into her music instead. But silence can only hold back so much. At 57, after everything she has lived through, she has decided it is time to reveal what she kept hidden. There are 5 singers whose betrayal and cruelty left scars that never healed. 5 names, 5 voices, who once clinked glasses with her in friendship, but later pierced her heart with cruelty. One of them had the audacity to dismiss her talent by telling her she had the body but no soul in her voice. And perhaps the most painful wound came from people who had promised loyalty for life, only to turn against her when she needed them the most. Céline's revelation goes on with those names, each carrying a chapter of heartbreak and disappointment that shaped Céline Dion's journey. So, keep watching to find out each of them. From stardom to a battlefield. The first name on Céline Dion's list of painful memories is Mariah Carey. For many, this might sound surprising, but in the late 90s, the music world often revolved around just these 2 voices. Both women could reach incredible high notes. Both sold millions of records, and both ruled the Billboard charts. From the outside, it looked like 2 stars shining side by side, but behind the scenes, it turned into a bitter rivalry. In 1998, when Titanic fever swept across the globe, Celine's My Heart Will Go On sat at the top of the charts for weeks, unshaken in its success. But just as her song reached its peak, Mariah released My All. To many, it seemed less like coincidence and more like a deliberate strike. Mariah did not only want to share the spotlight, she wanted to steal it. When reporters asked her about the success of Titanic, she brushed it off, saying the song was only popular because of the film, not because of Celine's voice. The comment spread quickly, and soon, Mariah's fans were mocking Celine, insisting she owed her fame only to Titanic and nothing more. The tension only grew louder at the American Music Awards. When Celine's name was called, instead of cheers, she was met with a wall of boos and whistles from Mariah's supporters. Standing on stage with the award in her hands, she tried to smile. But deep down, it felt like being crushed by invisible stones thrown at her pride. What should have been a night of joy became a moment of humiliation she would never forget. The rivalry did not stop there. In 1999, a major European tour was being planned, and Celine was initially offered the opening slot. But just before it was finalized, the deal slipped away. The reason was brutally simple. Mariah was said to sell more tickets, and Celine was pushed aside. Years of hard work and dedication seemed to mean nothing when she was made to feel like she was living in Mariah's shadow. It was never about disliking Mariah's voice, because Celine respected talent. What hurt was the way she was treated, not as a fellow artist, but as an obstacle that needed to be removed. Fame turned into a battlefield, and Mariah fought not for harmony, but for dominance. And while this chapter was filled with bitterness, the next story cut even deeper, because it was not just about music, it was more about love. Turning love into a cage. The second name that left a lasting scar on Celine Dion's journey was Peabo Bryson, the man who once stood beside her in one of the most magical duets of the early 90s. When they performed Beauty and the Beast together in 1992, the world saw two voices merging like they were meant to be. The chemistry on stage was so powerful that many believed it was more than just music, and for Celine, it felt like destiny. Away from the lights, their connection seemed real. They held hands backstage, whispered about the future, and spoke of loyalty that went beyond the spotlight. After losing Rene, Celine thought perhaps this was the man who finally understood her heart. But the reality was far from the fairy tale she believed in. In March of 1994, during a glittering after-party at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, packed with industry stars, her world came crashing down. Walking into the crowd with a glass of wine in hand, still glowing from her performance earlier that evening, she suddenly froze. Right there, in full view of everyone, Peabo was locked in a passionate kiss with Regina Belle, the very singer who had just performed A Whole New World with him. The music was loud, the laughter rolled through the hall. Yet for Celine, the room fell into silence as she stood invisible, shattered and humiliated. Trying to hold herself together, tears still found their way down her face. She turned to leave, but before she could disappear into the crowd, Peabo saw her. Instead of following her or offering an explanation, he raised his glass, smirked, and made a cruel remark that turned her pain into entertainment for the room. The guests erupted with laughter, and all eyes were suddenly fixed on Celine. Humiliation washed over her, but anger took over. In a split-second decision, she hurled the wine in her hand straight at him. The hall went silent. Red wine streamed down the face of the man she once adored. Regina stood frozen, and the flashes of cameras lit up the scandal. By morning, every headline carried the same story of Celine Dion throwing wine in Peabo Bryson's face. What had once been sold as a Disney fairy tale was now reduced to a public disgrace. The tabloids mocked her, fans laughed, and yet, what many didn't expect was that the stain followed Peabo instead. His career, once decorated with Grammys and acclaim, slowly began to fade. The image of the charming gentleman was replaced with the memory of a man drenched in wine at a party. A month later, Celine decided to confront him one last time. They met in a small Atlanta bar, a place where they had once dreamed up songs together. She asked him if he ever regretted how things ended. His cold, detached response pierced her deeper than the headlines ever could. To him, she was nothing more than a closed chapter, something to be forgotten. Those words sealed the wound. Peabo Bryson, the man who once sang about beauty and love with her, left her scarred not just by betrayal, but by cruelty. What began as a duet written in history turned into a public joke that she could never erase. And if a man could cause that much pain, the next betrayal, by a woman on a live stage, cut in a way even sharper. Stay tuned. Stealing Celine Dion's spotlight. Whitney Houston became the third and perhaps the most painful chapter in Celine Dion's story of betrayal and humiliation. The world adored Whitney, a woman whose voice seemed carved from heaven itself. When she sang, the air stilled, and listeners were left breathless. Celine admired her too, often moved to tears when hearing her sing, but admiration soon turned into bitterness, because behind the glowing headlines and award shows, a cruel rivalry was unfolding, one that left Celine bruised in ways no audience ever saw. In 1993, Hollywood was on the hunt for the perfect voice to perform the theme song for a highly anticipated romantic film. The demo found its way to Celine, and when she recorded her version, the reaction was overwhelming. The director was so moved that he was convinced her voice would make the movie unforgettable. For Celine, it felt like destiny calling again. She had already tasted that magic once with Beauty and the Beast, and she could see herself once more on the Oscar stage holding another golden statue in her hands. She dreamed of this moment as proof that her hard work and resilience were leading her to greatness. But just weeks later, the dream shattered. A phone call delivered the blow with cold detachment. The song had been given to Whitney Houston. There was no clear explanation, only a vague excuse. Later, a songwriter whispered to Celine what she already suspected. In Hollywood, talent was only part of the battle. Influence, power, and secret deals often decided the outcome, and this time, Whitney had won. The song, recorded by Whitney, became one of the biggest hits in history, cementing her as the ultimate diva. Celine was left on the sidelines, forced to watch as critics praised Whitney's soul while dismissing her own talent as nothing more than technical perfection. The sting of losing the song was sharp, but the deeper wound came a year later. In 1994, a massive charity concert in New York brought together the world's greatest performers. Celine and Whitney were paired to sing The Greatest Love of All. The world waited eagerly, imagining the power of two extraordinary voices blending together. Celine went into the performance hopeful, believing it could be a chance to build respect and unity between them. But once the music began, it became clear that this would be no duet. Whitney stretched her notes, overpowered the orchestra, and refused to share the climax that was meant to be divided between them. Celine stood waiting for her moment, only to be drowned out completely. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause for Whitney, giving her a standing ovation, while Celine stood beside her trembling, forcing a smile through humiliation. And then came the whisper, a cruel dagger hidden behind a smile, telling her that only one diva was needed. The next day, headlines across America screamed that Whitney had devoured Celine on stage. Critics echoed the same cruel verdict, praising Whitney's soul while mocking Celine as robotic. Fans were divided, with some mocking her and others sending words of comfort. But the damage was done. The wound deepened when Celine later met Whitney in a quiet Los Angeles studio. With courage, she asked why she had been humiliated so publicly. Whitney's cold response struck like lightning. To her, music was not a shared gift, it was a war. She dismissed Celine's heart and reduced her artistry to mere mechanics. For Celine, those words cut deeper than any headline. She went back to her hotel that night and poured her pain onto a blank page, realizing that music, the very thing she once believed to be the language of love, could also be wielded as a weapon. The betrayal was complete. The third cut did not come in secrecy or silence, but under blinding lights, on a stage shared by millions of viewers. But then, you would not compare it to the amount of heartbreak she got from the next. The legend who shattered Celine's childhood dream, Frank Sinatra became the fourth painful scar in Celine Dion's story of betrayal and heartbreak. As a child growing up in Charlemagne, Canada, she would curl up near the family's old radio, letting his smooth voice drift through the freezing winters. His music was her first teacher. His ballads were also her earliest lessons in passion and performance. To her young heart, Frank was not just a singer. He was a giant, the man who gave shape to her dream of becoming an artist. That dream seemed to blossom in 1995 at a glittering charity gala in Las Vegas. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and golden floors, alive with the sound of an orchestra. Frank was older now, his voice softened by time, but his presence was enough to silence a room. When he shook Celine's hand, his famous blue eyes still carried the fire of a legend. His words left her breathless. To hear him say she could carry on his legacy felt like a blessing from the very man who had inspired her childhood. When the organizers proposed they record a duet for the fundraiser, she believed destiny had placed her on the same stage as her hero. 2 days later, she stepped into his suite at the Wynn Hotel, dressed modestly and carrying sheet music, her heart filled with anticipation. She expected rehearsals, talk of harmonies, and the chance to prepare for what could have been a legendary collaboration. Instead, her hopes were crushed. The room was thick with cigar smoke and the sharp smell of whiskey. Frank sat back in his chair, silent as she laid out the music and nervously explained her ideas. His quiet stretched until it felt like a weight pressing on her chest. Then, with a smile that chilled her, he made it clear. The duet wasn't about music. If she wanted to stand beside him, it came with a cost far beyond her talent. The realization struck like ice. The man she had idolized had turned her dream into a transaction. Trembling, she refused, clutching her music sheets before hurrying out with tears streaming as soon as the door shut behind her. By the next day, the duet had vanished, given to someone else. The press branded her arrogant, accusing her of being difficult, painting her as a diva. She stayed silent, knowing the truth would never be believed against a legend so adored. Months later, when they crossed paths again, Frank's cold glare erased all doubt. His power had silenced her. His words were a warning, and the idol she once loved had become another scar. And as deep as that wound was, it wasn't the last. Because the final betrayal did not come from an idol or a legend, it came from someone she had once called a friend. Continue watching to know who this friend was. The sister who turned into the sharpest betrayal. Barbra Streisand was not just another star in Celine Dion's journey, she was the one who delivered the sharpest wound of all. After the storms with Mariah, the heartbreak with Peabo, the rivalry with Whitney, and the bitter disappointment with Frank, it was Barbra, the woman Celine once embraced as a sister, who left the deepest scar. Their paths crossed in 1997 when they recorded the unforgettable duet, Tell Him. From the very first moment Celine heard Barbra's voice rise beside hers in the studio, she was overcome with emotion. Barbra's tone was rich, strong, and filled with power, while Celine's floated with light and clarity. Together, they created a harmony that felt as if two souls had been waiting their whole lives to find each other. Barbra even placed a hand on her shoulder that day, calling her the sister she never had. Celine believed her, and from that moment, she told the world how honored she felt to sing alongside such a legend. The illusion shattered in February of 1998. At a glittering music gala in Beverly Hills, both women were invited to perform a short part of their duet as a treat for the audience. Celine stepped on stage full of joy, the crowd cheering as the first notes filled the room. But in a moment that froze her, Barbra took the entire climax, the very part that Celine had always sung. She was left with only faint harmonies, her voice fading into the background. The audience clapped with delight, unaware of the quiet betrayal unfolding under the spotlight. Backstage, Celine tried to understand what had happened, but Barbra's response was sharp and dismissive. She told her there was only room for one queen, and that while Celine had the technique, she would never have the same depth. That night, the newspapers ran with the story, declaring Barbra had outshone Celine. Critics compared them cruelly, describing Barbra as roots, and Celine as fleeting light. Fans who once celebrated her now mocked her as Barbra's backup singer. A few months later, they met again at a party in New York. Celine approached her, still searching for peace, but Barbra only used the moment to humiliate her in front of others, laughing as she reminded her there could never be two divas on the same throne. For Celine, that was the final cut. The moment she realized that even in friendship, Hollywood could turn love into betrayal. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.